All right, so recording has started. Welcome, everyone. Here we are in December already, getting ready for the holidays. I'm guessing today and tomorrow are going to be a lot of people's last days before full vacation time, other than the real troopers who are continuing into next week. So we've got a pretty full day here, or pretty full hour here, so I'll just get right into it. As we just indicated, this is being recorded. Please keep your sound muted unless you're going to be speaking. Just a reminder, these meetings are every third Thursday of the month, 2:30 to 3:30 every time. This Zoom link stays the same, so just keep it for your records, put it into your calendar, however you want to do it. I do send an email a week prior to the meetings and then the morning of. So if you have, if you or if anyone you know still needs to be on that distribution list, please let me know. So the folks who are attending these meetings generally are either associated with Delaware River Watershed Initiative or are just working in the Delaware Basin. And then we've got some folks that are attending from outside the Delaware Basin. Supporting this these meetings, as well as our Stroud Center support via Delaware River Watershed Initiative funds and via some seesaw funds for stations in Pennsylvania. So here's the Delaware River Watershed Initiative website, 4states1source.org. Check that out if you like. Here's the seesaw website, c-saw.info. So goals for these meetings, they're just a time for us all to meet up, and we usually present some topic in the form of a presentation. We also can have discussions, report issues. I'll do some Stroud updates here in a bit. We've generally been having kind of some focus topic presentations, ice, salt, and winter storm type stuff last month. This month, again, it's going to be a winter-based topic, maintaining stations in the winter.
In the kitchen.
Yeah.
Make sure you're muted, everyone. So that's me, Dave Bressler. Rachel Johnson is on the call here today. She's one of the main tech people involved with doing a lot of troubleshooting of these stations around the basin. Krista Reeves is the Musconetcong Watershed Association and does tech support, and Shannon Hicks is the designer, inventor of the mayflies and of these stations. And then Carol Armstrong and George Seeds are master watershed stewards that really help this effort along. Just to mention, all of these monthly meeting recordings, as well as other recordings from conferences and such, are at this website. So our primary goal with EnviroDIY continuous stations in the Delaware Basin are to support groups in using the stations for their own purposes. Secondarily, Stroud Center is doing analysis and starting to build tools that can help folks better characterize and use their data. All right, so today's agenda, I'm going to do some Stroud updates, then we'll get into this winter maintenance of EnviroDIY stations presentation, and then we'll have hopefully have a little bit of time for discussion, questions and such. So Stroud updates. Okay, so as many folks know, we have been transitioning Monitor My Watershed to Amazon Web Services, the Amazon Web Services servers. This is being done by Limnotech, who works closely with the Stroud Center. Anthony Oftenkamp is leading that effort. It's a pretty complicated thing to do from my perspective, and there have been some glitches that have come about. I'll get into it a little bit more, but some of the stations that went offline on December 7th and around that time will not go back online unless you reboot them. Turn them off, let them sit for a minute or two, and then turn them back on. That's all you have to do. And most folks' stations are back online, but some are not, and rebooting is the solution. Another issue or topic that came up with the Monitor My Watershed glitches was that there were updates being posted about those glitches on the EnviroDIY forum. And it kind of made us realize that it'd be good to remind folks to sign up for an EnviroDIY.org account and to get these daily or weekly updates from the forum. So I'll go into a little more detail about both those things. So if your station looks like this, where it went offline on December 7th or thereabouts and hasn't come online since, and your panels look like this, you should be able to get it back online by restarting the station. And as I mentioned, just turn the Mayfly logger off, wait a few minutes and turn it back on. If you do reboot the station and it stays offline, then it's probably just another issue. Maybe it's a bad cell board. Some of the 4G Digi boards that we put out are very flaky, and they can go bad very easy. So that's a likely cause if the station still does not come online after rebooting. Feel free to be in touch with that as you go about your business trying to get that station rebooted or stations rebooted. So just regarding signing up for EnviroDIY.org, all you have to do is go to the site, click here and set yourself up with an account, email address and whatnot. And then you'll be able to go to the forum and go to, for instance, here, this forum, the Monitor My Watershed forum, is where all of those updates regarding the Monitor My Watershed transition to Amazon Web Services were pointed out. One other aspect I should have highlighted here, this spot here, subscribe, is where you're going to click to get to sign up for either daily or weekly updates. And so I would just encourage everyone to do that. It's a very easy process, and you can just, even if you just glance through those updates, if you do daily, they come in at 4 p.m. every day. Just glance through those, and it at least starts to give you a sense of what people are doing and what types of technical issues people are having. And sometimes they may be issues that apply to you. And certainly if you have an account, then you can pose questions as well in the forums. Okay. There's a new blog that came out that describes this new transition to Amazon Web Services. There's Stroud Center's Rachel Johnson. So you can go to this blog and sort of read up on what's been going on. And then also there's a survey there that will ask you for feedback on the new platform using the new services. So please, if you would, go in there and fill that out at some point. And that would be much appreciated. So Scott Ensign, who is the Assistant Director of the Stroud Center and has been working closely with Anthony Oftenkamp at Limnotech throughout this process of transitioning to Amazon Web Services, is going to talk with us for 5 minutes or so and give us some more depth to what has actually been happening with all that. So I will stop share and allow Scott to have the floor for a few minutes. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think one of the biggest understatements that I've heard so far this year was when you described it as a pretty complicated process. Transition all of this to AWS. That's a big understatement. Anthony and his team have been working for the last 6 months to make this happen, and it was incredibly complicated. And fortunately, none of you saw really any change up until last week. And Dave mentioned we have these stations that are still not connecting and going where they should. So we're getting that taken care of. But other than that, none of you saw any change with the exception of time series visualization. Dave, you might want to mention that in some future meeting. There's been some tweaks in the time series visualization part of Monitor My Watershed to make it more responsive, faster, more scalable, and add new features. But so while you didn't see much change on your end, it's still the same old Monitor My Watershed, right? On our end, it's a super big deal because now we can start really trying to think about how to add the new features that we've all talked about for so long. We want to make it do this and we want to make it do that. And we could not do that on the old platform that it was on. So we had to go through this transition, and we're really excited that we're on the other end of it now. So that goes directly to our need for feedback for the site. What are the things that you like about it? What are different ways that you'd like to use it in the future? What are new tools that you want to see on the site? We need to hear that feedback from you because we don't want to start building things that people don't want. So we really need you to go to that survey and put some thought into sharing with us what you like, what you don't like, to help guide our path over the next coming year. So we put significant resources into this, grant resources and internal resources into making this transition, which we have been successful at getting to AWS. And now over the coming year, we have more grant resources, internal resources, and a grant from Amazon Web Services itself to develop out the foundation for building new tools, new features on the site to make it better, to make it faster, to save people time, to give people the things and the data analytics that they want. So we're super excited because we're going full bore into 2022 with another really intense 6 months of development, probably 9 months. So it's really the opportune time for all of you to share with us your thoughts on that. And also to share with you, the other reason we had to do this, actually, when we had to make this leap to AWS was because we were literally starting to run out of space. We have somewhere between 2 and 3 million data points on Monitor My Watershed right now. That's starting to be an enormous data set that we can only scale that and let that continue and the growth continue of that if we're on a cloud-based platform. So again, it doesn't seem like anything really changed on your end, but for us, it was a very big deal to make it where we are right now. Do we get the survey in there? I think Jim asked for the survey link. Jim, if you go to EnviroDIY.org, on the homepage right now is a link to a blog post that I just put up, and the survey link is in there. And to entice everyone, we're going to raffle off 2 mayflies to 2 people, 1 mayfly per person on March 1st. So we're really trying to get people to throw their weight behind the survey and help us out. So that's all I really have to share, is that we are putting a lot of resources over the next 6 to 9 months into making this better, bringing all the features that you want, or as many as that we can accommodate to the platform. And then just finally, in closing, I'll remind everybody, whether you know it or not, you're using a nationally unique and maybe globally unique tool. For a tool to be both an environmental IoT platform where your data goes straight into the database for you to visualize in real time, and where you can add observational data like leaf pack data, and the fact that it's interoperable. So perhaps many of you don't know this, but you can also access our data through the Kawasi hydrologic information system, and we're going to be building APIs so that other platforms can see your data. So in other words, people in the future won't have to go to Monitor My Watershed to see your data. They'll be able to see it across platforms. So that's a really big deal. And it's the future of water data. And I'm really proud to say for our team and what they've built, we're already there. And this is the future of how people are going to share data. And there's a lot underneath the hood that is going to make this tool really globally unique in the months to come. So you're all along for the ride with us on this, and it's a super big deal. And we're really excited to have everybody contributing data And please give us your feedback. So that's all I have, Dave. But I'd be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, why don't we have Scott take any questions that people have right now, because he may have to get off the call a little later. Any questions for Scott?
So Rob Tuttle asked, provide the link to the new data sharing platform. Rob, you mean Monitor My Watershed? That's going to stay the same.
No, Scott, that's the one you were just describing, where you could share data not through Monitor My Watershed, but through this external access point.
Yep. So currently we're connecting the Monitor My Watershed data to the Consortium of Universities for the Advancement of Hydrologic Sciences Incorporated.
Okay, this is...
It boils down to CUASI, right? So if you go to cuashi.org, you can look at the hydrologic information system. This is really an amalgamation of universities across the nation that are promoting the interoperability of water data. So we're a hub, like we're a provider, and there's lots of providers, and they data into these larger hubs and aggregators of data where you can go and find, all kinds of water data and environmental data. So that's the first step. And then the second step that we're going to build out throughout the year are ways that other platforms, we don't know who they are, can be anybody that wants to grab your data from Monitor My Watershed without even having to go there, will be able to scrape data and pull data off of there. And that's a really big deal, because that means that you're not just invested in Monitor My Watershed. If you put your data on our platform, it means that it's really publicly available to anybody that wants to pull it off. And I don't mean like a CSV file download. I mean integrating your data into their own platform. So that's the future of where water data is going, and that's what we're focusing on over the next 9 months.
Thanks, Scott. That's great.
Rob, I just put the HydroShare link in there, the CUASI HydroShare. Scott, we have a question from Nick Ho. Will we be able to add other data loggers such as meter group real-time data? So I think he's talking about if he's using a full commercial setup, is there a way to get those data onto Monitor?
We're learning about that right now, but a lot of commercial manufacturers have set up their own cloud-based data reporting systems. To my knowledge, none of those are open. So yeah, you can put your data there, but it's more difficult for you to share your data publicly. There's no way for you to take your data from there and put it into Monitor My Watershed, or have it read and interoperable on another water data platform. So I think the commercial manufacturers are doing a good job at building tools that are really good with their own products, but they're not cross-platform applicable. And the data that you send there is not interoperable. It's good on that site, and it's good on that proprietary commercial provider site, but you can't get it out of there to send it somewhere else. And again, that's what we recognize as the future of water data, is that it's interoperable across platforms. So Nick, I don't have a good answer for you, but that's my understanding as I start to learn more about what the commercial manufacturers are building.
Okay, because I know like the meter group, they have like an API set up. So I don't know if that means that it should be able to send out to the public, or it's more internal for something else. So yeah.
I would love if you learn more about that, let us know, keep us in the loop.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Scott? Chat? Does not look like it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it. And I will return to screen share and get back to the presentation. updates. Okay, so Scott mentioned the new look to monitor. Here's an example plot from in there. Same basic setup, but you can see the graphs look a little different, a little bit different color scheme, etc. You don't have to toggle back and forth between visualize and data series in order to bring in your parameters. All your parameters are already listed here, so you can just click them on and off. But obviously feel free to go in there and play around. The y-axis is not, you can't mouse scroll on that yet to zoom in and out. Presumably that's going to be something that's going to be built in as one of the first kind of updates to this. You can very easily zoom in on the x-axis, but not yet on the y. Just as a reminder, to go to this website for all kinds of different resources that we have available. This tab here on the Straight Wiki Watershed site, EnviroDIY, will also get you to these resources. Just keep that in mind if you're wanting to build up your knowledge on all of the details with this work. There's lots of different resources in here. There's a new salt monitoring resources section here. This is where all of the recordings from the monthly meetings go in this section here. Okay. And then finally, I mentioned the cell boards before, but we are continuing to update the old cell boards with a new data logger that a new cell module that Shannon has designed, and it is behaving much more reliably than the previous ones. So just keep this in mind. If a station goes offline, but the battery was well above 3.5 volts, it's likely that it's a cell board issue. Okay, and your cell board may have just fried and you're gonna need a new cell board and a new Mayfly. One of the new versions, version 1.1 that Shannon is putting out now. So feel free to be in touch if you have any questions about that, or you have a station that has gone offline and needs support. Any questions before we go on to the presentation? All good? Okay. I'll stop share. Switch to my other presentation. Back to share. And we're off and running. Okay, so this presentation is on simply just maintaining your EnviroDIY station in the winter. It's mostly centered around sensors, particularly the CTD sensor being getting surrounded and having ice attached to it. So this is the primary thing we're going to talk about today. The primary risk is ice freezing on the CTD pressure transducer, okay? So as I think most people know, when you look in this slot at the bottom of the CTD sensor, this white disc is the pressure transducer. It's thin and it's ceramic, and it's relatively fragile. And if you get water in here that's freezing, it can push up on this ceramic and damage it. And then that's going to throw your data off. So I'm just going to roll through some pictures here showing the types of ice formation that we've documented over the years around these sensors. Here and here, this is a small suburban stream. As you can see, you know, these sensors were most likely actually surrounded by ice and may have needed to be replaced. This one was again on a small stream. You can see that the sensors are probably not very far below the ice there and are most likely surrounded by the ice. I think these ones did get damaged. Here's another picture, just, you know, you can't really see much what's going on there. I think this is a deeper location in which the sensors are below the ice and protected. You can certainly have ice freezing above the sensors and everything will be fine. It's just when the ice gets to be attaching to and going around the actual sensors, in particular the CTD sensor, and even more specifically right around that slot where the pressure transducer is. Here's some more pics of just situations. You know, you have situations like this where you've got ice coming out from the banks and that type of thing. Here you've got a solid freeze, and you can see a bit of a wire here that's frozen in the ice. I think these sensors actually did survive because they're down in there a bit. This is a very small stream, and you can see, I have a closer up picture of this, but you can see this ice kind of forming below the sensors, hasn't quite surrounded it, but this would be a site that you'd really want to kind of keep track of. This is a bigger stream here, Pickering Creek, and you can see different levels of ice formation there. You know, what we're talking about here really is paying close attention to the sites and developing an understanding of how risky your particular site is to damage from ice. Here was an unsuccessful attempt at cutting the ice away from the sensors. If you get a lot of ice forming around a sensor, you pretty much have to just hope that you're going to be okay. Once it's attached, you really can't remove it. If you do, you're going to be at risk of damaging it. So this is some of the same pictures from before, but you can see here, this is in a deeper location. The sensors are over a foot deep here. And you can see that even though there's significant ice here, the sensors are well below that ice and are perfectly safe. That is ideally, that's the situation you have, and that's the situation most streams are in. The small streams are really the ones that are most at risk, such as this one where Jeff here is, you know, he's on the stream. This is Rocky Run. He's out on the frozen stream. And you can see here, where are the sensors? They're somewhere in here, but it's pretty frozen solid. So these are the types of situations where you have to consider how much you need the data and how prepared you are to losing a sensor. If the data is important and you're willing to risk losing the sensor and you're willing to go there and clean out ice, then maybe you keep it out, but maybe you decide to bring it in. Let's see, here's a question from Jim Moore. Is there any reason we can't delete the pin and just use a PVC end cap to set the depth of the sensor bundle? Removing that pin for maintenance is freeze. Yeah, Jim, I know you've had some success in doing that. I think the problem that most people will have is the moving water doesn't allow that. But yes, I mean, you can, if you have a situation where you can rig something other than the pin situation, then that's fine. I mean, certainly we're not recommending pulling that pin really in the winter unless you're going to be removing the sensors. Here's another example of some sensors that were kind of frozen in. And I'm not sure if these survived or not. Sometimes when the ice surrounds them, they can survive, but it's not a good idea. So here are the primary risk factors. Shallow water. So depth, as read by the CTD sensor at base flow, is less than 200 millimeters. So if your sensor's in a small stream and it's a stream that you know, historically has frozen, and you're in less than 200 millimeters of water, as read by the CTD sensor, then you're going to want to be pretty keyed into ice over the winter. Slow water as well, even if you're in deeper water, but there's a really bad cold snap, and it's a stream that freezes easy, then even if you're over that 200, you may be at risk. cold temperatures, certainly just keeping track of the weather. You know, how many days in a row have we been at under 32 degrees and how quickly is that ice freezing? So keeping track of just that sort of progression of ice formation is going to be a good idea, particularly if you're in a high risk situation. And then just looking at your actual water temps on your coming from your sensor and seeing how close to zero you are. If you're well above zero, then you're obviously not going to be at high risk of freezing. And even if you're at zero, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're at risk, because you may be in deeper water, or the ice just may not be forming that quickly at that station for whatever reason, flow, or maybe it doesn't stay below zero or at zero or near zero for a long period of time or whatever. So here's the situation in which the sensors are low risk. You know, estimated 10, this is probably more than 10 inches really, but you know, you can imagine that even if you got a super, super bad freeze, you can see by the kind of activity here that this is actually flowing water too. So it's hard to imagine a period cold enough that would put these sensors at risk. So if these were your sensors, and I think these might be Paul Wilson's sensors on Broadhead Creek or Paradise, seemingly these are very low risk because they're in nice deep water, and it's very unlikely that you're going to get ice freezing even close to the sensors. Even if you got 5 inches of ice down to here, your sensors are still perfectly fine. So again, this picture, just emphasizing that most of these stations have been properly installed, meaning, you know, the folks that installed them, whether it was Stroud or you guys, everyone has received proper training in how to install them. And so usually the sensors are in water that is already deep enough to protect from the risks of ice formation. However, like I said earlier, if you're in a shallow, you know, stream where there just isn't deep water, then you didn't have any choice as to where you put your sensor. And those are really the high risk places. And this is what can happen, where you get actual ice going down and forming directly around the sensors. And this was this station, this sensor did actually, the transducer did actually get broken in this process. And this was a situation where the station owner actually cut through the ice and removed it. And that itself may have damaged the sensor. It's hard to tell, but I'll get into it a little bit more, but you don't want to bang on the ice or bang on the sensors to try to free them of ice, because that itself may damage them. Let me see that we have some more. Okay, so Rachel answered. Good. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, so moving on. Options for handling high-risk situations. Again, high risk meaning shallow and slow-moving water. So as I mentioned, you really want to just monitor the conditions and the data, you know, as closely as possible. And then, you know, if you're keeping the sensors in there, which is perfectly fine, as long as you're, you know, if you are in a high-risk situation, you just need to be sure to clear that ice away, you know, before it can attach in large quantities to that CTD sensor. You can certainly remove the sensors for the winter. I'll give some directions on how to do that if you do want to do that. Some folks do that. You know, the main concern there is if you're trying to look at salt and look at salt spikes, then you're not going to have that data in the winter. But some folks aren't interested in salt. Francis at Primrose Watershed Association, he's mostly using his sensors for water depth readings. So he's not as concerned about the salt, and he has a very severe freezing situation where he's almost guaranteed to lose his sensor if he leaves it out. So he has to take it out for the winter. If you really feel like you have some better options for deeper water where freeze isn't going to be a risk, it's probably worthwhile considering just moving the whole setup. and putting your sensors in deeper water so that you can get that winter data and you don't have to worry about you worry less about the freeze risk in shallower water. Okay, so just some sort of maybe frequently asked questions type stuff. What should I do if I need the data but my sensor is at risk? Okay, I've been alluding to this, but here's some specifics. Pay attention to the physical conditions at the site. What is the stream looking like? How deep are things? You know, what is water level at right now? Pay attention to the ice itself, like how quickly is it forming? How deep is it going? Where is the ice forming? And then in relation to all that ice, where does my sensor sit? You know, in this picture here, you can see it's a small, shallow stream, and you can see this ice forming here. Doesn't look as if it's surrounding the sensor yet, but that's certainly a situation that if you were the station owner, you'd want to be keeping track of that. And this seems like a spot where you could probably break that ice away pretty easily and free that up without risking damage to the sensors. And then paying attention to the data. Certainly paying attention to the weather and temperatures, using your 10-day forecast so that you can really kind of keep an eye on things. You know, if you see a 10-day forecast and you've got 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever days in a row of below 32 degrees and you're in a high risk situation with your sensor, then you probably want to be thinking pretty hard about, you know, what's my approach going to be here? If you're in that type of situation, feel free to reach out to, you know, us at the Stroud Center, or make a post on the EnviroDIY forum if you want, just so that you're, you know, feeling comfortable about how you're going to handle the situation. And certainly paying attention to those depth readings coming from the CTD sensor. 200 meters or less, certainly if you get to 100 and you know you're at risk of ice, you're really going to be wanting those red flags to come up. And if you are in those high risk situations, then be prepared to clear ice before it builds up too much, because once it's built up and surrounding that sensor, you can't really do anything about it. So you have to get after it on an ongoing basis to keep that away, because once it forms that big chunk, then there's not much you can do but wait it out. So just again, another point, here's a situation in which they were clearing ice regularly and kind of keeping this hole free. You know, if we get extended weeks of super bad cold weather, that even doing that could get hard. So, you know, it's definitely an iterative process as far as like how you adjust to these situations, depending on your water level, depending on temperatures, depending on how the ice is forming and how deep it is forming. What if ice does end up forming around my CTD sensor? So I've pretty much already said this, but just to be clear, can I break the ice around the CTD sensor? No. That's only going to introduce more risk to breaking the pressure transducer. So if you're in a situation like this where you've just got solid ice formed around the sensors, pretty much your only choice at that point, to my understanding, and Rachel chime in, Shannon's not here today, but I think we're pretty much all in consensus that the only choice, if ice formed, does a solid chunk of ice does form around your CTD sensor, then your only real choice is to wait it out. And that's what I'm saying here. And, you know, so once that happens, then just use it as a learning experience, obviously, and prepare differently next time. Let's see, we have another chat. Can you, Grace asks, if you get to the sensor a bit late, ice has formed, can you use a blowtorch carefully? I would probably say no, just because of the risk of like the same type of risk that you would have with using a hammer or a saw around there, where if you happen to touch a wire with the blowtorch or happen to touch, the sensor itself, it might just break the whole thing entirely. Usually if the ice forms around the CTD, even if it breaks the pressure transducer, I don't think we've seen many cases in which the CTD actually, or in which the conductivity and the temperature go off too. So you'll still have the conductivity and temperature. And we've even, in this case, actually, even though the pressure transducer was damaged, it didn't totally lose function. It was just offset. It was reading negative, but it still responded to the ups and downs of water levels. So even though it was kind of like not kind of calibrated right anymore, it was still actually, once you apply an offset, it was reading more or less accurately even after being damaged. Now that's not guaranteed, but in that case, I think that is what happened. So definitely do not cut your sensors out from an ice block or pound them out with a hammer or a chisel or anything like that. Here's what can happen if you get freezing. So here there was freezing, or freezing happened and it looks like it pushed on that pressure transducer and made the depth go up, and then it just dropped off when it totally froze. And then you see there's some kind of wacky stuff happening here as the ice completely freezes in there. And then when it comes back, it's reading lower. So there's presumably some level of damage there. You do get wacky readings. You can get wacky readings in depth when the freezing is happening, where it goes negative or does this type of thing, just goes way high. Or you can get wacky conductivity readings where this is the same site where it just drops off to 0. But you see when it came back, it went back to a normal conductivity reading. So it's obviously never the end of the world when any of this stuff happens. It's just some pieces of equipment. But in this case, maybe you don't even lose your conductivity and temperature if that happens. If you do want to remove the sensor bundle for the winter, how do you want to do this? Well, it's fairly simple. You're just reversing the process of installation. You're going to cut zip ties that might be on roots and stuff. You're going to cut the zip ties that are attaching the wires to these tent stakes. And then once you've cut all those zip ties, you can pull up the tent stakes and you can go ahead and remove the bundle pin, and you can store the pin on the rebar itself. Just pull the bundle off and put the pin back in the rebar for safekeeping. And then you can just wind up all that wire as done here and put the sensor, maybe dry the sensor with some towels and then maybe wrap it again in some dry towels, put it in a Ziploc, and then zip tie it so that it's totally sealed off from any water being able to trickle in, and maybe position that like upright so that no water can kind of leak into this bag in any way. Another option is to simply remove the entire logger box and sensors and wires. The only other thing you need to do there is just have a hose clamp driver to remove the logger box, to remove loosen the hose clamps on the back to slide the logger box off. You may also need a wrench to remove the cap on the logger at the logger pole at the top. That is an option too if you just want to take the whole station out. Okay, so finishing up here, just a summary. What should I definitely do? Okay, what should you definitely do for winter maintenance of these stations? Monitor the ice risk at certain sites that are, well, monitor their ice risk at all sites, but specific sites such as ones with shallow water, less than 200 millimeters, slow water, where even if it's a little deeper, it might freeze deep. The ice might freeze deep. Air temperatures below 32 degrees for multiple days, and water temperature near 0 degrees for extended periods. And then you're definitely going to want to pay attention to monitor my watershed. and well, excuse me, here what I'm saying is monitor the station, pay close attention to the conditions on site, visit the sites weekly, and then pay close attention to the data on Monitor My Watershed. Check the data ideally daily. I mean, that's really something that is ideal regardless of whether it's winter or not. It's just checking the data daily just to make sure everything is functional. But in the winter, you might want to look a little more closely at depth, a little more closely at temperature. Continuing, if you do have a high-risk station, just, you really want to be pretty careful about what you do. Carefully consider your moves. And, consider this question. If you're in a shallow, freezing stream, but you need the data, are you willing to lose a sensor to get the data? If that's a yes, then so be it and go for it and just clear ice away as needed. And just a few more points, you can certainly can consider, lining someone up, someone who just Monitor My Watershed. They just sit at their desk, for 15 minutes a day or so, and they just check a station or stations, through the winter. And this is really something that's good to do all the time, just to keep track of station function. And then having some people, Jim alluded to the fact that it gets pretty cold out there and it can be really tough to put your hand in the water and deal with things out there. So you might want to consider finding folks who are pretty rugged and can handle those cold conditions and don't really mind being out there. Certainly with all this, feel free to reach out to the EnviroDIY community via the forum and also reach out to us at Stroud directly. What should I definitely not do? As I mentioned before, definitely do not break ice after it has attached to the CTD sensor. Maybe a few little flecks and stuff like that are fine if you can remove with your hands, but big chunks, definitely don't be trying to remove those with a hammer or saw or any other tools that you would be banging or jarring the ice and sensors around, because that may damage the pressure transducer itself. And along those lines, just be gentle with all of this work at the stations when things are freezing. The wires get brittle, things get kind of frozen over, even if the wires aren't buried under a whole lot of soil, which they could be, but even if they're just buried under some brush and stuff, you don't want to be yanking on things because you can damage things that way. Okay. Not a serious issue, but something else to consider with snow. You can see here, snow does at times just cover the solar panel. You're not going to be charging at all when that happens. It's a very simple fix. You can just brush it off with whatever, hand or towel or brush or whatever. But that can affect your battery charging, so you want to pay attention to that. And then just health safety risks. It can be cold out there, and getting all of your extremities cold and numb can be stressful, and it can make you more hasty, and all this type of stuff. It really can exacerbate things and increase your risk of accident. So it's really, you want to take your time out there and be super attentive and super aware of your surroundings and not get hasty, because accidents happen very, very easily. Proper, staying warm. Towels can be really nice. If you're going to be putting your hands in the water without gloves for, so you get that dexterity, or you're just going to be using thin gloves, towels can help to dry off with as soon as you remove your hands, and certainly using, waterproof or neoprene gloves. Just wanted to make this point. A lot of times people do go out alone. If this is part of your practice, just make sure every time you go out that someone knows where you're at and when to expect you back. And if you're going to be in an area that doesn't have reliable cell coverage, then you really might want to consider one of these GPS emergency tracker things, so that if something did happen, twisted an ankle or something like that, and you couldn't get out, that you'd have a way to get in touch with someone. So I think that does it. Normal folks here for you to contact me and Rachel and Shannon and Krista. Here we have another chat Question, scuba wetsuit dive gloves work great for freezing water. Yeah, so neoprene gloves. Good suggestion, Jim. And Rachel has experimented some with gloves too, so she may have some input for folks if they're interested as well. So, all right, we are at 3:22, so we've got a little time for discussion, questions on that presentation. Anything else is follow-up from Scott's. If anyone has questions about winter salt type stuff from last month's presentation, we can talk about that. We're sort of open at this point for whatever anyone wants to discuss.
Yeah, I had a question, Dave, on just scheduling. I just talked to French and Pick or GMI. We'd like to install two new sensor stations at French Creek. I know Stroud is doing their bug research, and I think we're sending water samples to GVA, but it would really be great to have a mayfly sensor station. What's the timeline? As long as GMI or French Pick is willing to pay for it.
Yeah,
timeline.
Jim, would you be building those stations, or who? As you know, Stroud is not really building and installing stations, as we had been for a short period of time. We're really kind of supporting stations getting built and installed via, these build workshops where someone signs up, they buy the monitoring kit, they buy the sensor from the manufacturer, from Meter Group, and then they attend the workshop, and we pretty much walk you through the entire process, and you leave the workshop with a functional station that you go and install.
Okay, well, that's probably an option. The other question I had was, we've got two, one at Fairview and one at Moores Road, that are non-functional and been so for some time. Any hope of getting that working pretty soon? Yeah,
we should really, Rachel will note that. Unfortunately, we've just had the pandemic, along with all of these transitions in technology, have really set us back in terms of troubleshooting. So
yes, I understand.
Yeah, sure. and but I know you've been hanging out, so we'll try to get that if you want to set up a call to sort of just discuss, Jim, why don't you just email me, and maybe we can just talk about it and see what we can do, and maybe work out whatever expenses there may be.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
All right, good. What else?
This is for Rachel and David. Rachel, wonderful visit, and convey that to Stephen too. It just was very, very helpful. In the Nature Conservancy, we don't seem to be getting enough sunlight. So we're this Sunday, Alex and Stephen Shu are going to be going down and moving, leaving the sensor where it is, but moving the station. And so there'll be some fiddling on that to get better sunlight. But thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear our trip was helpful. It was great to see you in person too. Something to consider just right now, because daylight hours are so short. If someone is able to just swap out a battery for a few months until daylight hours begin to be longer, it might be okay in the long term. Of course, if you want to move it, you're welcome to do that as well. But if there's someone close by that could just swap out a battery. Do you guys have a battery charger set up?
I think Alex is on. Maybe he's away from speaking. I think I will ask him.
I think Zach did. I'm guessing Zach did. And maybe, what's your new tech person's name, Grace?
We're in the process of hiring right now.
Okay.
But Alex picked up as much, I think, all the equipment from Zach's place.
Okay.
So
Grace and Al, I don't know if Al's on. Oh yeah, he is on. I just pasted into the chat the link from the DRW from the Wiki Watershed DRWI page with the supply list for a number of different things. But if you look under power, there is you know, a 4-bullet list of the 4 different things that you need for charging a battery. And it's basically the charger, the wall adapter, the actual battery, and the cable.
okay.
Yeah, Dave, I've noticed on ours with low sunlight, and a fully charged battery, in other words, charged up to like 4.1 volts, it's almost good for close to a week as long as you got a little solar. And then so pretty much once a week, you got to swap out a battery that's almost to 3.5 with one it's 4. I think it goes up about 4.1. And it generally will, I think, last almost a week. I don't know, Rachel, has that been your experience?
That sounds about right.
You have some sunlight.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is then basically through the winter, this is a weekly task.
Well, it's going to be situational, Grace. You really, all you need to do is just monitor the battery level.
Okay.
And when it gets to that, you know, when it gets to 3.6 or something, or, you know, maybe even 3.7, you want to be keeping a pretty close eye on it. And then, you know, when it gets to 3.5, when it gets to 3.5, then you definitely want to swap out.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Could be a week or it could be longer if you're getting some charge, you know.
Yeah, I'll convey this to them.
Great.
For Sunday.
Great.
But everything else seems to be going fine.
Wonderful. Yeah, good luck on your hiring of a new tech person. That's exciting.
We've been doing interviews, yes.
Wonderful.
Zoom. And the response has been some impressive people.
Great. And it's a great example, you know, of just how you can keep these stations functioning, is to have, you know, someone like you who's kind of an Al who are overseeing the effort, and then having some volunteers who tend to the basics of maintenance, and then having one tech person who really, you know, can drill down on details and has a pretty good knowledge of, you know, the technology and all of the intricacies.
Yeah, we're hiring for. We just got a really nice grant for mapping GIS, and so.
Great.
But being down in Cutterbackville and stuff, that's going to be probably a new volunteer rather than our hire.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Grace, what organization is this? TNC? What organization are you with?
Two. New York EnviroDIY, along with Alex, and who founded it, and I'm sort of one of the sort of co-people on that with Alex. But on the local level, it's Deer Park Rural Alliance. We're fiscally sponsored by New York EnviroDIY. We have a lot of data on our website, which is NewYorkEnviroDIY.org. Or
they're all the way up there in southern New York, Jim.
Oh, okay.
We're very close. We're probably doing more monitoring than is in anyone else in this area, I would say, in the Neversink watershed and its tributaries. And we've just recently had somebody reach out to us through the Nature Conservancy with similar issues further up in Sullivan. So everything is growing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's great. I'm glad to hear you're moving along with things, Grace. All right, so we are at 3:32. Anything else before we close out here from anyone? Okay, well, I hope everyone has happy holidays, and we will see you all at the, if not sooner, see you at the January 16th monthly meeting.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye.
Dave.
Bye,
Happy
all.
holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Dave.
you.
Bye-bye.